I feel like my life has been a complete waste. The good news is I found out about childhood emotional neglect, and it makes sense. Out of all the things I've learned in psychology, MBTI, personality disorders, attachment theory, codependency, polyvagal theory, CPTSD and autism, it's the one that makes the most sense, the one that I can identify with. Probably because it takes away your voice. There is an emptiness inside victims of childhood emotional neglect. I've always known I'm different to other people. Other people seem to be full of life. They get something from each other which I don't. People don't make me happy, and I don't make them happy. There's an emotional exchange which I don't do. I don't use emotions. That's the key indicator. For the past few years I attributed that to autism and a lack of affective empathy. But I can see that it's logical that I don't use them because nobody ever asked me to use them. And now as an adult the struggle is, why would you use them if you're on your own? I barely have any friends, one locally and several around the world, which isn't unusual for autism, but CEN takes away your voice. I don't have anyone to speak to about my burden, which is why I'm speaking to a camera. I think the goal of life isn't accumulating stuff or money, it's to be surrounded by people who love you. I've always wanted a family, and in those things I've failed despite my best efforts. I've put a lot of effort into it, but I never seem to get the result that I want. It's taken me 20 years to get a diagnosis of ASD, and to discover childhood emotional neglect. At the age of 40 I'm happy that I found it, but I don't know what to do about it. I'm not sure if the proposed solutions are going to work, which basically boil down to ask yourself how you feel 3 times a day. And I'm not sure if there's enough time left to make a difference anyway. As I am now, I might be able to manage 1 emotion per week, although if you were to ask me now how it wouldn't be happiness. I had a double whammy of bad news. People telling me what I can't achieve, what I can't be. And although I'm an expert in handling rejection, sometimes it's hard not to reject life entirely. I don't need anything from anyone, which is exactly what I was taught to be, self-sufficient and alone. Teaching a child to be alone by neglecting them is guaranteeing that they'll be alone in adulthood. So I've made a list of 54 traumatic things which have happened to me until now, most of them in childhood. 54 traumas. How much can one person take? I feel like I'm going to find out the answer because it's almost too much to bear to live with the things that I've got to live with, and to share my life with nobody except my cat. Unfortunately, cats provide limited opportunities for emotional development, which is what I've always strived to achieve despite myself. Like the Jack Nicholson film, I wonder if this is as good as it gets. From now on, my health will decline, my opportunities will decline, my romantic prospects will decline, probability of having a family will decline, and friendships will decline, to say nothing of the economy, which is also declining. So here I am. Here we are in Shavasana. I don't want anything. I don't need anything. What kind of life is that? It's a pretty bad life, isn't it? One in which I can't achieve my goals because my reach exceeds my grasp, either due to autism or because of stunted emotional development. There's feeling alone around people, or feeling lonely because you can't express yourself. But it's a special kind of loneliness when you actually can't touch somebody emotionally. To genuinely bring somebody else joy. That's something I dream about. So my first memory of isolation came to me during an ayahuasca journey. Some people dream during ayahuasca journeys, but I think I regress. I've gone back to several occasions from my childhood, the earliest of which was being back in the womb. It's a place with no sight, only a feeling of comfort and complete contentment. Your eyes aren't developed, so there was nothing to look at. It's a very different kind of memory, like remembering a dream. But following on from that, maybe when I was age 1, I remember lying in a cot and I was playing hide and seek, or peekaboo with my mother. I found out that I could make her come and go away as I wanted by pretending to be asleep and then calling or making a noise. But one time I pretended, and she never came back. It was very distressing. I couldn't do anything except lie there and accept my fate to be alone. It was my fault because I was too good at the game. That was the first time I ever knew aloneness, a trend that would continue. As a single mother, my mother relied heavily on emotional support from the neighbour. That he was an alcoholic never seemed to bother her, but it bothered me. She didn't listen to me, though. I would be left alone while my mother was visiting him. I would cry on the porch for hours after school. She wouldn't come and let me in the house. Possibly due to my ASD, or maybe because of his behaviour. I didn't want to be in that environment. So I would just stay on my own at the front of the house with no friends or family. Just a declining hope that I might get what I wanted, my needs met. Sometimes she would trouble herself and let me in the house, and sometimes I would spend the entire night on my own, the house to myself, while she stayed up all night talking in his house. Her quest was always more important to her, but the worst moment was when he pretended that I was invisible for a whole 24 hours. I used to try and provoke a reaction, to escape the solitude that he'd put me in, by turning over furniture, by carrying a skateboard. I'd walk past and he'd invalidate my entire existence by saying, "The skateboard's floating." Child abuse for sure. I've come to realise that bullying happens because of how you unconsciously project yourself. So people would treat you the way that you treat yourself, and you got that image from the way people treated you. Your caregivers, your parents. So it's kind of like an intergenerational trauma, and you're an unconscious participant in your own suffering. When I joined the army, in the first week of training, you're told to write a letter home. It was very telling that I didn't want to write a letter home. I had nobody to write to. I had almost consciously excised my mother from my life on purpose. Years later, when I was about to take off from the house on my motorbike, she came out to have a look. I shouted at her to leave me alone. She had no right to partake in my happiness. Whenever I was bedbound with illness, I shouted at her to leave me alone. I suppose that indicates that I'd built a wall around myself. But she never asked herself how it happened. She asked me why I hated her, although I never used those words, she must have felt it. But she never thought it was something that she did or didn't do. The hard part about this is you have to think about it in reverse. It's not what somebody did, it's what they didn't do. So it's hard to see what you don't. It's hard to know what you don't know. That's why I think it's taken me so long to find this theory. I wish that I knew how to make people happy. But how can somebody make somebody else happy if they don't know how to make themselves happy? And they were never shown how to be happy by their parents because their happiness was never interesting or desired. It's a paradox. Catch-22. Chicken and the egg. It's an absolute waste of a life to disregard emotions. I've always known that. Some people mistake it for a choice. I didn't choose. They think I chose to hurt them by being cold and aloof, but I didn't choose to hurt them. In fact, I'm a victim of hurt, but you can't articulate that. You can't make them understand your pain because their pain from interacting with you is greater. The whole encounter just breeds more aloneness for both parties. I can feel that my psyche as it is now has an emptiness. There's current affairs, there's philosophy, there's psychology, books, games, memes. But I don't want any more than this, than to sit here. Maybe that's autism. Being self-satisfied because you're focused inward, and having your emotional life restricted externally, is a hell of a combination. The DSM doesn't recognise it. Under Section E of the Reactive Attachment Disorder, which is the closest thing to childhood emotional neglect, it states that a diagnosis can only be made if autism is not present. I wonder if this is why I haven't met anyone like me. I have met other emotionally neglected and ADHD sufferers, which I have an affinity for, but I don't think there's often a comorbidity. So, not only is there an emotional void or deficit inside you, but you can also find yourself in a metaphorical hole. If you're unlucky enough to find that there's nobody to support you, I don't know that you need to get better. Getting better only matters if you're within a social group. If you have nobody, like Tom Hanks on a desert island in Castaway, what benefit does cultivating an emotional life even have? There's a theory that if humans evolved past our bodies into pure consciousness, we would have such a cognitive ability that we would understand everything about the universe in an instant. After doing that, there would be nothing else to do, nothing else to experience. So 1 millisecond after achieving non-corporeal form, humanity would decide not to exist, because we've already experienced everything except death. I've spent my life looking for the truth of everything, and I'm getting to the point where I've found it. And there's nothing. Like I said earlier, the point of life is love. Maybe not everyone can enjoy that. Maybe it's a privilege. Everyone talks about self-love, which is all well and good, but the existence of the self is predicated on the existence of other people for reflection. Otherwise, there's no need for a self. If there are no other people, is there really a self? I don't know that there is, and if there's not, then nothing matters.